Welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. We'll guide you through the ups and downs of note investing and teach you all about the nitty-gritty details of the business that other people won't talk about. Your host, Dan Deppen, is a former aerospace engineer and product manager who transitioned away from cubicle life to full-time note investing in 2018. Our website is www.fusionnotes.com, where you can subscribe to this podcast, comment, and find links to other information on note investing.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the Note Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Deppen, and in this episode, I'm going to be talking about sub-performing loans. But before I get into that, I thought I'd talk just briefly a little bit about the state of the market in light of COVID and everything that's been going on. It's just an area that I get a lot of questions on. A lot of people ask me how it's affected my portfolio and what I'm seeing going on in the market. So for me personally, and some of the other people I've spoken with, really seeing far less impacts than I thought that I was going to see a couple months ago. I'm actually recording this August 31st of 2020. If you're listening to this at some point in the future, so we're several months into the COVID episode, and have had a few loans that missed payments, but for the most part, they've picked back up again. Had one loan where, borrower actually sent in a letter from her manager at a restaurant that said, hey, we're shut down because of the shutdowns that are going on, and can I defer 2 payments and then pick up again? And, that worked well. We deferred the payments for May and June, and then, she's gotten back on track and made the last few. So, overall, very minimal impacts. Have had 1 or 2 loans kind of go bad, but honestly, that's not totally unusual. So I haven't seen anything out of the ordinary. Again, a little bit of a surprise compared to what I was thinking. I guess we'll just have to see how things go forward, how unemployment programs hold up, and what they do as far as additional stimulus, and whether the economy can keep moving or not. But so far so good. On the acquisition front, I haven't really been seeing as much inventory, and a lot of what I've been seeing lately has been kind of junky for the most part. Although on the other hand, I haven't really been actively looking too hard to buy loans right now. I've picked up some onesies, twosies here or there from people I know where things have kind of come to me, but I've been mostly focused on working my portfolio right now, so I haven't really been in that mode of reaching out to folks and trying to buy things. So it could be that there's a lot more inventory out there, but I just haven't really, it hasn't been naturally flowing its way to me so far right now. So anyhow, that's what I've been seeing in the market. I thought that was just a good thing to address since it's something I get a lot of questions about. Oh, the other thing too, is wanted to thank everyone for the response to the performing pricing podcast last time. If you missed that, that was episode 38. So a lot of people checked that out and enjoyed that. And if you're more interested in information on how I do pricing, you can go to fusionnotes.com/pricing, and there's a training course on there. It's $27, but it can teach you everything you need to know about pricing performing notes. And so with that, I'll get into the main topic today, which is subperforming loans. And so probably need to start by defining what the heck that is exactly. So most people know performing loans and non-performing. So performing obviously being a loan that's current and implies a good pay history. Non-performing are generally loans that are at least 90 to 120 days behind, sometimes really, really, really far behind, and have a good chance of heading towards foreclosure. Subperforming, to my knowledge, doesn't really necessarily have a dictionary definition of what that is. But I'll give you my definition, which is basically those loans that are kind of in between performing and subperforming. So generally, I see a lot of loans where the borrowers don't make a payment every single month like clockwork, but they never quite fall far enough behind that they're going to get foreclosed on. So I've had loans where I had one loan in particular where the borrower made a payment every single month, but was running about 60 days behind. And so they kept eating late fees as they went and never quite got caught up. Other subperforming loans, or what I consider subperforming loans, will do things where they may make a few payments in a row, miss a payment or two, make a double payment to get caught up. And so, in general, with my definition of a subperforming loan, the borrowers are generally making an average of 10 to 12 payments over the course of the year. They're just not coming in every month. And you would be surprised how many loans out there are like this. The first obvious question is, why would a borrower do that? Why would they make payments every month and eat late fees and never quite get caught up? And I don't have a great answer for that. I'm going to go through some examples and some kind of mini case studies at the end of this, of ones that I have done. And I'm really not sure why some borrowers fall into this category where they're just perpetually, like I said, never falling behind to where they're going to default, but never really just making a payment every month. And I think for some people, it's like it's in their blood. Like they're just not going to do it. That's kind of the way it goes. But as we get into this, I'll explain why I like these loans and some of the things you can do with them. And, the two main reasons why I like subperforming loans is because they're not fully performing. For one, you can get those at a better price. So for like a contract for deed, where if it was fully performing, might go for 75 or 80 cents on the dollar. These ones that are subperforming, you might be able to get 60 to 70 cents on the dollar, and they have the same amount of cash flow sometimes, where 11 or 12 payments are coming in. So what that implies is a higher yield overall. There are some downsides and some risks to these as well. I mean, there's a reason you're getting a lower price than if it was a fully performing loan. But overall, the cash flow is often really good on these things at the end. So if you're willing to kind of deal with the borrowers and deal with the fact that they're not going to pay like clockwork every month, I've been able to find some really good deals in this territory. So how would you price these things, if you were going to buy one? And I'll start with the caveat that every loan is different, and there are a lot of different flavors of subperforming. But at a high level, I'm basically using the same method that I do for performing notes, where I'm calculating a yield to maturity. Now, in some cases, you might be getting an average of like 11 payments a year instead of 12. But what I do is I calculate the yield based on 12 to get an idea of what that will be if the borrower makes 12 payments over the course of a year. Now, as I talked about in the pricing course, the yield that you target is going to change note to note based on the risk level, right? So if you're dealing with some really low risk, solidly performing note, I'm going to be willing to buy that at a higher price and lower yield than something that has more hair on it. So if you are buying subperforming, that yield needs to be significantly higher. Well, not even significantly necessarily, but it needs to be quite a bit higher than what it would be for a performing note. The other thing that comes into play on performing notes, or subperforming notes, is just like when we're dealing with performing, where we kind of want to understand the doomsday scenario if we have to foreclose. We're obviously going to look at this as well in subperforming, but we're going to look at that scenario a lot closer. And I want to have more margin to get made whole in the event that this thing goes from subperforming to not performing and I have to foreclose, because it's obviously more likely to happen on a subperforming note than on a performing note. So, kind of the same process as a performing note for pricing, but you're going to need to target a higher yield, and you're going to need to pay closer attention to that foreclosure/forfeiture scenario. Okay. Now, when we're working, after we buy a performing note, we're getting a higher yield, which is great, but there's like always a price you pay for that, right? There's no free lunch in any market. So some of that price you pay is the increased risk of foreclosure and having to deal with that. The other price you pay is there can be a little bit more work in dealing with it, right? Like, so some of these borrowers may need a little bit more attention and a little bit more hand holding. So what I do with these notes generally, depending on exactly how far the borrower is behind when I buy the note. Now, when you buy the note and the loan is transferred, the previous servicer is going to send out a goodbye letter, and your new servicer is going to send out a hello letter. I sometimes send out my own letter on top of that directly to the borrower, and it basically says, reminds them that, hey, we bought your loan. Here's where it's being serviced. Sometimes the servicer is the same, hopefully, or point out the new servicer, and then say, here's what's going on with your loan. We see you're, let's say, 60 days behind. And then it's worded kind of nicely. It just says, hey, hope, I'm paraphrasing a lot here, hope to see you get, back on track and get this caught up, because if it goes 120 days behind, then we will start the foreclosure process. So I think it's a good signal to the borrower that something changed and we're keeping an eye on this, and we know you're not quite keeping up, and if it does fall further behind, there's the potential for foreclosure. And a lot of times that kind of spurs borrowers on to just go ahead and get it caught up, which I've had numerous borrowers when I bought subperforming loans have done this. Now, I don't share the actual verbiage in my letter. It's something that I've actually gone through a lot of iterations on. It has some legal caveats in there, so I'm not giving legal advice and I'm not telling you how to write the letter. But that's one way you can kind of help jar these things from subperforming to performing and reduce the odds that it's going to become non-performing. The other thing that I've talked about a little bit before in this podcast is I'll often send follow-up letters if a borrower does miss a payment. So if we do have one of these spotty payers and they miss a payment, especially off the bat, I'll often send a letter that basically says, hey, we noticed you missed a payment. If there's an issue, you can call me. We're always happy to talk to you. We can work, we can help you get things figured out. But if it falls further behind, there is the risk of foreclosure. And that usually is oftentimes followed by a double payment the following month. So I think it's just helpful to let the borrowers know that you're paying attention and kind of watching what's going on. Again, I don't share the letters, but these are worded very nicely, but convey the intent. And then the other thing you can do, and this is really what I would recommend for newer note investors, is just have your servicer handle this and give them a call. So if the borrower misses a payment, you could just ask your servicer, say, hey, could you give them a call to see what's going on? And depending on your servicer and, even who you have running your particular loan at that servicer, some of them are real good about this. Other ones you might have to follow up a bit. That's just part of dealing with loan servicers, which is probably a good subject for a future podcast. But then also we'll also ask the servicer to reach out when I initially board a loan. Some servicers do this automatically. Allied is pretty good about this. When you board things, they usually reach out right away on the phone, especially if the loan is behind, and a lot of times that helps get things going. And if the servicer is going to do that, then I won't send out my own letter. A lot of these things will depend on what the servicer is or isn't going to do, and so it's a little bit different loan to loan. But the point is, for subperforming loans, for best performance, to minimize the chance of it sliding back further, generally requires a little bit more work on the loss mitigation front than a performing note would be. So that's part of the price you pay on these. So, what you do expect to happen when you buy a subperforming loan? Like, what kind of results and outcomes can you get? And the short answer is I bought a lot of these, and it's kind of all over the map. But I'll give you some examples that I run to. Some of them do what I call magically reperform, which means I buy the loan and the borrower just kind of gets caught up. Sometimes they could be just that they do it on their own, where they get the hello and goodbye letters from the servicers and they understand that something changed and they're a little bit worried because they're like, well, okay, this person I had the loan with before, I kind of did whatever and nothing bad ever happened. Someone new has it. I'm 30 or 60 days behind. Why don't I just go ahead and get this caught up and then I don't have to worry about anything? That actually happens quite a bit. Some require a little bit of outreach and then get on track. So just like the outreach I just talked about a few minutes ago, I have had ones fully default after doing that. I have had loans that have wandered between 60 to 90 days, and then all of a sudden they just go off a cliff. And then you end up in a fully non-performing scenario. And so, if that happens, you need to be prepared to deal with that, whether you're going to work that out yourself or use your loan servicer to work out the non-performing scenario. And then the other ones that I run into a lot, and these are always very frustrating, is there are some borrowers who never quite get fully on track, but never quite fall 120 days behind where you can foreclose. So it's almost like no matter what you do, and that's kind of to my comment earlier, for some borrowers, they're just never going to make the correct payment every month. It's like not in their blood. And these are kind of frustrating. They're good from the cash flow perspective. So if you've bought correctly and you're getting a high yield, that's good. The problem is, they can become hard to resell and these things kind of drag on. So the path on these things, and as I get into some of the examples, I'll show this. The path that these loans take can be very nonlinear. Sometimes they just reperform. Some of them just stay subperforming. Some of them go non-performing and the borrower reinstates, and then they backslide again. They can be a little bit all over the place. So they don't always run like I learned, where you have this timeline. You buy the note, you get the loan transferred, you do loss mitigation, and then either it starts performing or you foreclose and it takes X amount of months. Sometimes these things go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it's just something that you kind of have to be ready for. So, just to kind of reiterate some of the specific risks is that, some of these are going to fully default and require a foreclosure. So if you're not comfortable dealing with that, then you've got a couple choices. Either you can have your servicer handle it, which can be good. It really all comes down to your servicer. And like I said, often the specific person you have running that loan, whether you trust them to do that. I've had some things get really sideways when I've had servicers try to work out a non-performing loan. The other thing, I don't personally do this, but the other thing you could potentially do is just build it into your pricing and risk model and resell the loan and take a haircut if that happens. It's not a strategy I employ, but it's one of your potential options if you like to buy these loans to get the high yield, but you just don't want to deal with foreclosures and REOs. And then, that main risk too is just that, some of these borrowers are just never going to pay on a regular basis. Like no matter what happens, you're never going to have a fully performing loan. And so it could be impossible to ever resell the loan at its full value. So if your pricing model is assuming, hey, I'm buying this thing at a big discount for 65 cents on the dollar, but I'm going to get it fully performing and sell it for 80 or 85 cents. With certain borrowers, that's just not in the cards. So there's just things you have to understand. Make sure you're good with the yield that you're getting when you buy it, and make sure you can handle the scenario where they foreclose. And from a pricing perspective, when I look at the foreclosure scenario, if it's subperforming and I'm buying it at high yield, I don't necessarily need my foreclosure ROI to be this big home run because it's not going to happen that often. It's going to happen more often than on a performing note. But if I can kind of just break even on the foreclosure scenario, that's okay, because now if I can deal with that, then it enables me to buy a lot of these subperforming loans at higher yields. So just want to emphasize there's no free lunch here with these things. There is a price that you pay. All right. And now I'm going to run through some examples, and some of these are loans that I still own. So I'm not going to be real specific as far as like where these are and what the houses look like, because I don't know how many of my borrowers follow my stuff. I suspect at least one or two of them do. Um, so let me run through some of these now. So the first one here was a loan where it's contract for deed, and the borrower just has this tendency to send in a couple $100s every now and then when he has it. Never quite a full payment, sometimes more than a full payment, but never like the right amount. I've even had credit counselors reach out to him to try to teach him that, there's a P&I payment and an escrow payment every month, and so you need to pay a specific amount down to the penny. But this person never does that. It's always some, increment of $100. Like I said, sometimes it's more than a full payment. A lot of times it's less. Sometimes he makes, $100 one week, and then the next week sends in $200. It's sort of all over the map. And, sometimes we'll go through stretches where we're sending a decent amount of money. And, well, kind of went through a stretch where ended up falling way, way behind. And he had kind of fallen behind steadily over time. I mean, a lot of this occurred before I purchased the loan. So I ended up deciding, because there was also a lot of equity in the property, so I was kind of okay with foreclosing in this particular case. And so I said, okay, fine, I'm just going to put my head down, go through the legal process, because this trying to get it reinstated, reperforming, is just not happening. And so we went through the legal process, got pretty far along, was getting towards the end. And the borrower ended up paying about $7,000 to reinstate the loan, which I did not expect. The other characteristic of some of these borrowers with subperforming loans, a lot of them want to stay in the property and are not going to let it go when push comes to shove. And so this guy, who has been all over the map, paid $7,000 to do a reinstatement. This is one of several surprise reinstatements for large amounts that have had over the past year. So, of course, after this happened, I'm happy not only that we got the loan caught up, there's this big cash windfall, investor was happy, and now the borrower's got even more skin in the game and a bigger stake, or a bigger incentive to stay on track. And of course, right after this happened, he continued back to his trend of making sporadic payments. Is now decently far behind, so I'll have some decisions to make in the coming months, whether I want to go through the legal process again or not. Like I said, some of these things are just really frustrating. Because I think just no matter what, this loan is never going to perform 100%. However, the cash flow is very good, so it's still a good deal. All right, so the second one, this one actually started as a non-performing loan, and right when I bought it, used the loan servicer to reach out to the borrower. This one is at a kind of a full service loan servicer. And we made a deal with the borrower to modify the loan to get it to a payment that they could afford and to restructure things. And right after we put this agreement in place, the borrower was just making sporadic payments. They were making payments, but they would miss, like make one, miss one, make a couple, miss two. And before too long, got about 120 days behind. And I was itching to start legal because this particular one was in a neighborhood in a big city that I really, really like, and no people on the ground, and there's a lot of equity, really a up and coming part of this city. So, this is one I would be more than happy. This is a property I would be more than happy to take back, which is unusual because in most cases, that's the last thing that I want to do. But the borrower kind of kept in this, not quite falling 120 behind, just staying within the bounds where I couldn't get legal restarted. Um, and then they made several payments in a month to get caught up. I think they made 4 or 5 payments in 1 month. So again, from a cash flow perspective, not too bad, but frustrating from the standpoint that hopefully they can stay on track where I can get this seasoned enough to just sell it as a performing loan. But again, that might be a challenge just given the borrower's history. For them to go 12 months without missing a payment is a pretty tall task. Hopefully that happens. I'm not quite holding my breath. Um, the third one was kind of easy and kind of good. So when I bought it, the loan was somewhere between 60 and 90 days behind. So right in my sub-performing sweet spot. And as soon as I bought the loan, the borrower started sending in extra every month. I think they were sending in about a payment and a half. Did that for a few months, got the loan caught up, started to pay some additional principal, which was great. And then I was able to resell it as a performing loan. And that thing, actually, I should have put actually the numbers on the return in here. Didn't think to do that. But anyways, this one was kind of a home run deal because I was able to capture a large number of payments, I mean more than one payment per month while I held the loan, and then sell it as a performing loan. So that was kind of an easy win, easy home run. Didn't really even have to do much with this. It's funny. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but it seems like with notes, my note deals that have the best outcomes seem to require the least amount of work. My note deals where I've gotten upside down on and lost money or broken even have been the biggest nightmares with the biggest headaches and the most amount of work. So it's just funny if it goes well, your dollars per hour is just through the roof. If it goes sideways, you're basically doing a lot of work to lose money or break even. So it's like worse than minimum wage at that point. And then this last one, it was another one with a reinstatement. So this one was kind of non-performing when I bought it. Bought the loan, borrower made a payment or two. I don't know that they were necessarily consecutive months. And then they weren't paying and it had fallen fairly far behind. So I started the foreclosure process, reached out to the borrower during the foreclosure process. And this was a borrower that was kind of what I call a hard case. I mean, there was no working with this lady. Um, trying to get her send in whatever it was, like a $300 payment was just like pulling teeth, wasn't going to happen. And then the forfeiture process was actually a forfeiture process. I said foreclosure on the slide if you're watching this on YouTube. Got nearly towards the end, had my realtor queued up. He was kind of bird dogging the property, had a team in place, was ready to get the property cleaned out, get it secured, get it sold, really ready to roll. And then the borrower paid $4,000 to reinstate the loan, much like example one that I gave, which I really did not expect. I don't know if she robbed the bank or what, but somehow that happened. So, like I said, I've had a handful of these in the last year where, it's impossible to get the borrower to send in a couple $100s and all of a sudden they cough out a few thousand. And then after that, borrower got on track, was making payments on a regular basis. I was pretty happy. And then we started with the missing again. So this is another one. We'll have to see what happens, whether we can eventually get it on track or whether we have to go through the foreclosure process. It's really unfortunate. I mean, the borrower has a lot of skin in the game. I don't think the borrower is going to let it go again. Again, this is just one of those challenges where I don't know if this particular borrower is ever going to actually make 12 payments on time in a row. That could be tough. So That wraps up what I've got for you today on subperforming loans. If you got any questions, leave a comment or drop me an email at dan@fusionnotes.com. I'm always happy to help out. And if you've got any suggestions for topics or future episodes, let me know. Also, if there's anyone in particular you'd like me to interview or have on, let me know. Even if it's somebody that may be hard to get, I can take a swing at trying to get them. I will have some more interviews coming up. Should have Chris Seveny on here fairly soon. So I've always got kind of a big queue myself of topics. I mean, as you work in notes, it's just funny every day new things come up. So coming up with topics is not really necessarily difficult, but the particular ones, particular areas you're having trouble finding information on, or you want to learn more about, or you got specific questions about, please reach out and holler. And let's wrap up with my last ask is, if you haven't done it already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com/Fusion Notes, I would really appreciate it if you subscribe. The subscriber count is into the 700s somewhere now, and I really want to get that to 1,000, because if I get it to 1,000, then what I can do is start to put links within the videos to link to other ones, so I can do some cool things. Like, for example, um, like in this one, I referenced the pricing podcast from last time. I can have a link and like a little picture of that, so if someone was watching that and they wanted to go to that other episode, they could just click it and go right over to make life a lot easier. So anyhow, if you could subscribe to that if you haven't already, I would greatly appreciate it. So until then, I'll see you next time. Thanks very much for listening and watching.